Hi friends! Today's video is the next vlog in the series about the dark fairy costume that I have entered into the Foundations Revealed competition this year. This part will be all about the stays and will probably be my longest video yet. I really wanted to push myself for this project because I feel like a lot of my practical sewing skills are at a higher skill level, but I do not have much experience with historical sewing. I don't have much experience at all with pattern drafting or historical patterns, let alone corsetry. So overall for this costume, I really wanted to push myself to use my own patterns to really focus on improving my skills as a costumer. This was my first time drafting a historical pattern and only my second time making stays. And I will not be using historical materials or methods. So if you are looking for a 100% historical accuracy from a costume, you're probably not going to find it from this costume that is a fantasy costume that I made on a budget. Anyway, I made this costume to fit my dear friend Katherine because I am pregnant and the character is not. To make the pattern for these stays, I flat drafted them very loosely based on the arc method or the curved drafting method, which is talked about in Patterns of Fashion 5. And I say very loosely because I actually have no idea how the arc drafting method actually works. I don't own Patterns of Fashion 5. I was not able to find the process described anywhere on the internet, and I wasn't able to take a class on how to do this, which I did find out was something that you can do usually, so that's pretty cool. What I did find was images on a few blogs where people had posted what their final pattern drafted using this method looked like. So from those pictures, I did a lot of guesswork. I kind of tried to reverse engineer how it was done and extrapolated a lot. I would have bought the book, and I do actually have plans to do so in the future because I have heard phenomenal things, but I just didn't have the time or the money to do that right now. I still don't have any idea if what I came up with is actually anything like the arc drafting method, but since I used that as my base, I feel like I do need to credit it. To my very inexperienced eye, the stays look like they fit my friend pretty well, so I am just really happy with how it came out. So first I used Katherine's measurements to make this basic curved shape, and then I just kind of started drawing in seam lines where I thought they would go. Honestly, for some of it, I was winging it pretty hard. Like the back panel, I just made the width of my ruler because that was easy to do. For the front panels, I really tried to reference some extant garments, both laid flat and put on a mannequin to see where these seam lines should go and how they would fit on a body and curve. When I was making the pattern for the stays, I referenced quite a few images of extant garments, but especially pulled inspiration from this pair from the V&A and this pair from the Fine Arts Museum of San Francisco. Anyway, I will stop yapping and show you the process of how I made them. It is currently but o'clock in the morning. I'm awake because the baby was teething and I finally got her to go back to bed, but I cannot. So I'm starting on the stay pattern because I can't make my brain shut up about it. So this is my sad attempt to start patterning. I thought a curve here would look really cool, but I can't make my brain figure it out, so I may keep it, I may not, and I can't figure out these tabs at all. I've been staring at reference images for like 45 minutes, and I just can't figure it out. Alrighty, it has been a couple of hours. I am marginally more caffeinated and awake. I've just been looking at a ton of different reference images of 17th and 18th century stays, and I've decided not to do this curve after all for two reasons. One of them being that all of the stays I saw with this curve were fully boned and I want to do half boned. I'm not saying there weren't half loan stays with this curve, but I just couldn't find anything that I thought looked nice with it because I don't know anything about 17th or 18th century stays, so it could look like anything. The second reason is that the back is going to be covered by a cloak anyway, so I don't want to spend this time trying to pattern match this curve if a straight line would be easier if you're not even going to see it. This piece here is the one that was really stumping me, but now that I've got it laid out in this kind of flat formation, I know how I want to curve this and add the tabs here. So I'm going to leave it like this and then trace over and make my adjustments to a separate piece of paper. Once I completed that pattern, I cut it out of cardboard to make a cardboard mock-up and took it over to my friend Katherine's house to do a fitting, and it did not go so well. I promptly remembered that Katherine is the human embodiment of a Tolkien elf. She is tall and majestic as heck, and so when I kind of used my torso measurement to reference the length that I should be making this pattern, because I didn't have hers, I made it way too short. So you can see here, this is the new pattern. All of the width measurements are pretty much the same, but the height is quite a bit different. Not so much in the back, but especially in the front here. So this is the fitting from the second cardboard mock-up, which you can see fits pretty well. We did have to move where the straps connect in the front because they were just a little too close to her arms for comfort. So these are the materials I made the stays out of. Some cotton drill, and I did need to buy that. Some linen blend that I had already had in my stash from a previous project, and this polyester brocade, which has lived a long and eventful life. It started out as curtains I bought at the thrift store in 2018, according to my phone's timestamp. Then it lived a life as a pseudo-Renaissance gown for a Ren Fair before I knew that historical accuracy was a thing you could even strive for. So here is the new pattern to fit Katherine laid out. I had originally intended this front panel to have a seam down the center, but after confirming with a few of my friends that this isn't absolutely necessary, I decided to cut it as one piece because it would be one less seam I had to pattern match. And I decided to cut it like this instead of cut on fold because my fabric is really slippery, so I would be able to make sure the pattern lines up in both places. I did cut the lining pieces on the fold because I didn't have any patterns to line up there, so it was just easier that way. I also used this time to mark out where I needed to add seam allowances because I didn't entirely trust myself not to just start cutting and forget where they needed to be added and where they didn't. I'm not gonna lie, I used a really weird cutting layout, and the only reason I did that was because I wanted to save as much fabric as possible since I did have to buy this new, and I don't like spending money. Here I marked where I was pretty sure it would end up fitting her after the overall waist reduction, and I added some extra fabric to play around with it when we did a real fitting. Then just repeated the same thing all over again except with the linen. There's no reason this linen is red, it's just what I had left over from the last project. Then I started trying to figure out where I was going to place the pattern on these, and I took a very long time to make up my mind. It was a little sad. I hope this makes some semblance of sense, but in order to pattern match, I laid the pattern over where it should line up with, kind of sketched the design, and then added seam allowance. Calling myself out, I totally forgot to clip that corner at first. So then I took all 3 layers, the linen lining, the interlining of the drill, and the fashion fabric, and used my machine to run a line of stay stitches around the outside of each piece so that they wouldn't shift and move around, especially the fashion fabric, because it was slippery like nobody's business and would stretch if you looked at it. I did a lot of the stays construction on my home machine instead of my industrial machine because I knew it would take a long time and I wanted to have my machine upstairs so I could hang out with my kiddo. Say hi. Say hi. After that, I had a sneaking suspicion that my chalk would leave residue and the blue marker wasn't really showing up, so I had to get a little creative with how I marked my boning channels. For the boning channels, I decided to use this metallic thread. It was my first time working with metallic thread, and it was pretty much just as hard as people said it would be, but I thought it would add a cool texture and some interest. Not that the fabric doesn't have interest by itself, but I thought it would be cool. With the heavy-duty zip ties I was using as boning, it kind of worked out perfectly, where if I sewed very close to the edge on one side of the tape and then sewed very close to the edge on the other side of the tape, I could run a line of stitches right between those lines once I pulled the tape up, and it would be the perfect size to fit the boning through. I cannot tell you how immensely satisfying peeling this tape off was. In true Katie fashion, I did not have a plan for the boning channels, I just kind of went for it. At this point, I took all of the pieces and put the long ends through the serger because this fabric was fraying like crazy. And of course, gave everything a good press. I kind of just measured the boning by holding it up to the fabric pieces And then I used heavy duty nail clippers to clip the edges and round everything out so that it wouldn't poke through the fabric. Then I inserted the boning, making sure that it went between the drill and linen layers instead of between the fashion fabric layer and the drill. Then I pressed everything really well, making sure that the boning got nice and warm and stuck everything under flat, heavy things to sit for a while and keep their form, except for the front curve, which I left a little bit of just to help support the bust. And I switched out my foot to an invisible zipper foot and sewed along the seam allowances as close to the boning as I could get. So here's it all laid flat. I tried to pattern match the first 3 panels. Here it's okay, but I couldn't pin it, so it isn't the best. And here it actually turned out really great. I am so proud of how this back panel turned out specifically. So here I cut the back panels extra large because I'm not too confident in my fitting abilities, and I tried to do this in a way that was visually appealing. However, if they fit her the way I expect them to fit her, then the back will end up pattern matching as well when it's all laced together. All right. Oh, yeah. Oh my gosh.
Look at that.
Is that comfortable?
Yeah, that's good.
Ah! Okay. I'm so happy. And you're sure it's comfortable?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I still cannot believe it, but it actually did turn out the way I had expected it would. So I flipped the back panels over, shaped them a little bit to be the shape I wanted at the bottom of the tabs, and sewed a boning channel along there just to put one more bone through both of the back panels. Then I used my awl to create some holes. I tried to do this in a spiral lace pattern, and I bound them all by hand. I did use embroidery thread, but I tried to make it a pretty thick ply, so hopefully that'll turn out all right. At this point, we did a test for how the fitting was going, which was pretty well, I think. I used a shoelace to lace because I heard round cord pulls at the eyelets and can break them. And at this point, I had also attached the straps and we fit those as well. I decided to stop the eyelets here because I wasn't sure which way was right, whether it should be laced all the way down the back tabs or not, and I figured I can always add more eyelets later. I can't take away eyelets. To make the binding, I used quilter's cotton and used this handy dandy bias tape maker I got for Christmas last year and just ran it under the iron. It's very important because my basement is freezing. At this point, I took some scraps and cut some tabs so I could play around with how the binding was going to look, because I am not very good at binding and I really wanted to get some practice in. To finish the seam allowance on the inside of the stays, I could have just left these edges serged, but I didn't feel like it was very secure or pretty, quite frankly. So I took some bias tape, folded the edges over the flaps of the seam allowance, kind of tucked them in and flattened everything out, and pinned it in place like that. Then I commenced what felt like 10 million years of hand sewing. I hand sewed the inside of the seam allowance binding here and also the inside of the tabs. One morning, I just made a little extra coffee and shoved one of my shoelaces into it because I felt that the white was just a little too bright for the lacing. Here you can see the difference between the dyed versus undyed, and it's not too different, but it's enough that it was worth it to me. So these are the finished stays. This was the hardest and longest project I have ever taken on. Just for the stays alone, not the whole costume, I lost count at how long it took me at about 23 hours. And there were at least 3 to 4 hours after that I just didn't count specifically. So I can't tell you exactly how long these stays took me, but it was somewhere around there. This project was incredibly ambitious for me, and I cannot tell you how ecstatic I am and kind of in awe I am that I made this and it turned out in a way that I'm just so pleased with. From start to finish, I made this. I patterned this, I cut this, I don't know. I'm just really, really proud of the work that I have done on these. Like this, it's like a smile. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the making process. I cannot wait to see what everybody else has entered into the competition. And I will see you in my next video where I talk about the accessories that I made for this costume. Bye, friends.